They say that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but they never tell you about the ones who dig beneath it. Imagine a world where death is mercy, where serving the God Emperor means accepting a fate so terrible that even the damned would weep for you, where your reward for loyalty is not glory, not honor, not even the cold comfort of oblivion, but an eternity of labor in darkness so absolute that even hope dares not whisper your name. There are billions of worlds in the Imperium of man, hive cities that scrape at skies they'll never touch, forge worlds where the air itself is ash and prayer, agri-worlds where souls toil until their backs break and their children inherit their burdens. But there exists one classification of world that Imperial citizens speak of only in hushed tones, a designation that appears on star charts with warnings written in languages older than memory itself. Penal mining colony. 3 words that carry the weight of damnation. The lexicon of the Administratum contains over 40,000 classifications for human settlements across the Imperium. Death worlds, shrine worlds, cemetery worlds. Each carries its own particular brand of suffering, its own unique relationship with the Emperor's eternal light. But penal mining colonies occupy a special circle in this vast bureaucratic hell, places where the Imperium sends not just its criminals, but anyone deemed expendable enough to extract value from before they're finally allowed to die. On the mining world of Koth Tertius, deep in the segmentum obscurus, the sun rises every 16 hours, but the miners never see it. They descended into the planetary crust decades ago, some of them. Centuries ago, others. The deep veins run for thousands of kilometers, following seams of promethium, adamantium, and rare elements whose names exist only in the forbidden texts of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The tunnels are older than the current dynasty of sector governors. Some say they're older than the Imperium itself, carved by civilizations that turned to dust when humanity still believed in things like mercy and justice. The air down there tastes like iron and regret. It clings to your lungs with every breath, a viscous thing that seems almost alive in its malevolence. The temperature fluctuates wildly, scorching heat where magma veins run close to the surface, then plunging cold in the deeper shafts where the planet's warmth cannot reach. The miners work in shifts measured not in hours, but in quotas. 5 tons of raw ore per rotation. Failure means punishment. Success means another rotation. They are not slaves, technically. The Imperium is quite clear on this distinction. They are penitent laborers, working off their crimes against the Golden Throne. Some committed heresies so minor they barely register in the grand ledger of human sin, speaking an incorrect prayer, questioning a tithe, being in the wrong district when an arbit sweep came through. Others are guilty of true transgressions, their souls marked by corruption or weakness that threatened the Imperium's eternal stability. But here, in the dark, all sins are equal. All sentences stretch toward infinity. The overseers walk the gantries above, their faces hidden behind rebreather masks that give them the appearance of mechanized gargoyles. They carry shock mauls and lumen rods, casting pools of sickly yellow light into the perpetual gloom. Some are former miners themselves, elevated to positions of minor authority by demonstrating sufficient cruelty to their fellows. Others are failed. Imperial Guard recruits, men and women whose bodies proved too weak for true military service, but whose capacity for casual violence found perfect expression here. The machinery never stops. Vast drilling rigs bore into stone that's stood unchanged since before humanity reached for the stars. Conveyor systems rumble day and night, their mechanisms so loud that miners developed their own sign language, a complex system of gestures that allows them to communicate across distances where speech would be swallowed by industrial thunder. The machines are older than anyone can remember, their spirits appeased through ritual and sacrifice, sometimes mechanical, sometimes biological, sometimes both. And the bodies, there are always bodies, Mining accidents account for 60% of deaths, according to official records. Cave-ins triggered by unstable geology or overzealous excavation. Equipment failures where safety protocols were sacrificed for efficiency. Gas pockets that explode with invisible fury, turning entire work crews into carbon statues frozen in their final moments of terror. But the unofficial numbers tell a darker story. Exhaustion, malnutrition, violence between desperate souls who've forgotten what it means to be human, and things that happen in the deepest shafts where even the overseers fear to tread. Some miners speak of voices in the dark, whispers that promise release, salvation, power. The Ecclesiarchy priests who minister to the colony, maintaining the mandatory prayer sessions between shifts, insist these are hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation and exhaustion. They preach about the Emperor's light reaching even into these depths, about suffering as a path to redemption. But their sermons ring hollow in tunnels where the only light comes from failing luminators and the occasional spark of grinding metal. The truth, the one the Imperium will never officially acknowledge, is that penal mining colonies are not about punishment or redemption. They are extraction engines, designed to wring every last drop of utility from human beings before discarding them like spent promethium cells. The average life expectancy is 3 years. The galaxy is vast, and human life is the Imperium's most abundant resource. For every miner who collapses in the dark, 3 more are loaded onto transport ships, their crimes read aloud as they're processed through intake facilities that smell of disinfectant and despair. But Koth Tertius holds a particular secret, one that even most of its overseers don't fully understand. The deepest shafts, the ones that require special authorization to access, don't mine for promethium or adamantium. They dig for something else entirely, something that predates the Imperium, something that perhaps should have remained buried. The miners who work these restricted zones never speak of what they see. Those who try find themselves reassigned to even deeper levels, places from which no one returns. In the oldest records, fragmentary data scrolls locked behind encryption that would take 1,000 years to break, there are references to Koth Tertius before it was a penal colony. Before it was even an imperial world. The planet had another name then, a designation in a language that's been dead for millennia. And beneath its crust, in chambers that shouldn't exist according to any geological model, lie artifacts and architecture that suggest humanity was not the first to dig here. The miners working the deep extraction zones have begun to change. Subtle alterations at first. Unusual marks on their skin, eyes that reflect light differently, whispers of dreams that feel more like memories. The overseers report these changes, but the reports disappear into the vast bureaucratic machinery of the administratum, lost among trillions of other documents deemed unworthy of higher scrutiny. And still the mining continues. Still the quotas must be met. Still the Imperium's endless appetite demands feeding. Deep below, in tunnel shaft designation Omega 77 Tertius, a team of miners has just broken through into a chamber that isn't on any official map. Their luminators barely penetrate the darkness beyond, but in that faint light, they can see walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. And something else, something that might have been a throne once, though whatever sat upon it is long gone. The foreman reaches for his vox to report the discovery, but the signal won't transmit. Not from this deep. Not anymore. The vox crackles with static that sounds almost like breathing. Foreman Varric holds the device closer to his ear, as if proximity might somehow force a signal through kilometers of solid rock. Behind him, 6 miners stand frozen in the chamber's entrance, their luminators creating a weak constellation of light that barely touches the walls. They've all seen the symbols now. Geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. Script that resembles High Gothic but predates it by unknowable centuries. One of the miners, a woman named Chele, who's been down here longer than anyone can remember, begins to weep. Not from fear, exactly, but from something deeper. Recognition without understanding, like remembering a dream that was never yours. Varric makes a decision that will doom them all, though he doesn't know it yet. He orders the team to secure the chamber and continue excavation protocol. The quotas don't pause for discovery. The Imperium's hunger doesn't acknowledge mystery. They have 16 hours to extract whatever valuable materials lie within before the next shift rotation. His hand trembles slightly as he marks their location on the portable data slate, a device so old its screen flickers with every input. The coordinates register as impossible. They're deeper than the geological surveys indicated the planet's crust should allow, deeper than the mining operations have official authorization to reach. 3 levels above, in the Overseer's sanctum where the air is filtered and almost breathable, Commander Holst receives a fragmented report. The words arrive corrupted, gaps in the transmission creating spaces where meaning collapses into noise. Chamber found, unauthorized depth, symbols, request. The last word cuts off mid-syllable, replaced by that same breathing static. Holst is a veteran of the Astra Militarum, a man whose service record includes 3 campaigns against orc incursions and 1 against something the official records simply designate as redacted. He earned his position here not through cruelty, but through the particular kind of competence that makes him dangerous to ignore and too useful to promote. He understands immediately that this moment represents a choice between duty and survival. He chooses duty. He always does. The Adeptus Mechanicus presence on Koth Tertius consists of exactly 3 tech priests and 17 servitors. They maintain the mining equipment, perform the sacred rites of appeasement over the machine spirits, and file reports that no one in the sector bureaucracy ever reads. Tech Priest Designate Morrow receives Holst's summons with the mechanical precision his augmentations demand, but somewhere in the meat portions of his brain, something that might still be called curiosity stirs. He's been stationed here for 47 years, performing the same rituals over the same aging machinery, watching human resources flow through the system like promethium through a fuel line. This disruption in routine registers as a statistical anomaly worthy of investigation. The descent takes 4 hours using the primary lift system. Morrow travels alone, his servo-skull companion projecting Auspex readings that grow increasingly erratic the deeper they go. The electromagnetic spectrum behaves strangely down here, creating phantom signals and dead zones that suggest interference from unknown sources. His augmented eyes switch between visual spectrums, filtering through darkness that seems to possess texture and weight. At level -700, the temperature drops 15 degrees in less than 100 meters. At -850, his internal chronometer begins losing synchronization with Imperial Standard Time. Minor errors, barely measurable, but errors nonetheless. The Omnissiah's domain is one of precision and logic. Unexplained deviations are heresies against the machine god. Varric's team has been in the chamber for 6 hours when Morrow arrives. They've established a perimeter of luminators, creating a pool of sickly light that reveals more than anyone wanted to see. The throne is not empty after all. What they initially mistook for shadows is actually the desiccated remains of something that might have been human once, though the proportions are subtly wrong. Too tall. Limbs that articulate in ways that don't match standard anatomy. The skull, if it can be called that, possesses additional orbital cavities arranged in patterns that suggest either mutation or deliberate enhancement. Morrow's Auspex shrieks warnings in binaric cant, detecting energy signatures that have no classification in his extensive database. Above ground, a different drama unfolds in the chapels where the Ecclesiarchy maintains its tenuous hold on the miners' souls. Preacher Valdis has served on Koth Tertius for 12 years, longer than most survive in positions of spiritual authority on penal worlds. He's watched faith erode under the weight of endless suffering, seen devotion transform into desperate superstition, witnessed prayers that sound more like accusations than worship. Tonight's congregation is smaller than usual. 73 souls gathered in a chamber carved from raw rock, the walls adorned with Imperial aquilus welded from scrap metal and prayer scrolls written in languages that drift further from official doctrine with each generation. He preaches about martyrdom, about sacrifice as the highest form of worship, about how the Emperor sees their suffering and weighs it against the sins that brought them here. The words taste like ash in his mouth because he knows what the miners know, that the Emperor's gaze, if it exists at all, does not reach this deep, that their suffering serves not divine purpose but simple economics, that redemption is a lie told to extract compliance from the damned. But he speaks the words anyway because silence would be admission, and admission would be heresy, and heresy would mean joining the congregation he serves. In the back of the chapel, a miner named Grath listens with ears that hear more than they should. He's been down in the deep shafts, the ones where whispers echo through stone and dreams feel more real than waking. He's seen the changes in those who work the restricted zones, the way their eyes lose focus during prayer, how they respond to commands with fractional delays, the marks on their skin that look almost like script if you know how to read them. He suspects what Valdis will not say aloud, that something beneath Koth Tertius is waking, and it's been waiting a very long time. Back in the Forbidden Chamber, Morrow completes his initial analysis and reaches a conclusion that fills him with something his augmentations cannot suppress: fear. The architecture predates the Age of Strife, predates Old Night, predates possibly even the Dark Age of technology. The symbols are not random decorations, but functional components of a system designed for purposes his logic engines strain to conceptualize. And the energy readings, faint but persistent, indicate that this system is not dormant. It's been gathering power, slowly, incrementally, for millennia, feeding on something. He runs calculations that return results he immediately purges from his memory cores because even considering their implications borders on tech heresy. He sends a priority transmission to Commander Holst using hardline communications, bypassing the unreliable Vox network. 3 words in binaric code, followed by their translation. Seal this level. Holst reads the message and understands that some discoveries are not meant to be made, that the Imperium's 10,000 years of ignorance regarding Koth Tertius was perhaps not ignorance at all, but policy, that there exist secrets so dangerous even knowledge of their existence is corruption. But it's already too late. Sel, the miner who wept upon first entering the chamber, has not been idle. While Morrow conducted his analysis and Varric maintained his perimeter, she approached the throne. Not with her body, she remained standing at her assigned position, luminator in hand, following protocol. But something else, some aspect of her consciousness that the Imperium has no taxonomy to describe, has been exploring the chamber's true dimensions. Dimensions that exist perpendicular to the physical space, folded into geometries that human minds were never meant to perceive. She speaks, and her voice carries harmonics that shouldn't be possible from a human throat. The words are not Gothic, not any language currently spoken in the Imperium, but everyone understands them with perfect, terrible clarity. They describe a compact, an agreement made when humanity was young and reached beyond its grasp, when the species that would become mankind traded something precious for knowledge they lacked the wisdom to use. The throne's occupant was a witness to this compact, a record keeper, a failsafe should the terms ever be violated. The terms have been violated. Humanity forgot its debts. The Imperium, in its arrogance, believes it owns the galaxy by right of conquest and the Emperor's will. But there are older claims, ancient contracts written in the substrate of reality itself. Morrow's servo skull detonates without warning, its power core overloading in a cascade that should be impossible given its built-in safeguards. The explosion is small, barely enough to damage the chamber, but the light it produces reveals something that was not visible before. The walls are covered not just in symbols, but in names. Billions of them. Trillions. Every human who has ever descended into Koth Tertius, listed in microscopic script that covers every surface. And beside each name, a number, a debt, a price still owed. Commander Holst activates emergency protocols that have existed since the mining colony's foundation, but have never been used. Ceiling charges placed at key structural points throughout the deep levels, designed to collapse the lower shafts entirely if containment is ever compromised. He has authority to use them only under specific circumstances defined by orders so classified he required 3 different verification codes just to read them. This situation qualifies. He knows it will kill everyone below level -700. Knows it will destroy equipment worth more than his entire career's salary. Knows the administratum will demand explanations he cannot provide. His hand moves toward the activation rune with the mechanical certainty of a man who has already made peace with his decision. But before he can complete the gesture, every Vox unit in the facility activates simultaneously. Not with static this time, but with a voice that sounds like consensus, like every human who has ever died in these tunnels speaking in perfect, horrific unison. The voice asks a single question that will echo through Imperial records for centuries. Always redacted, always classified, always remembered by those who know where to look. What happens when the debt comes due? The ceiling charges fail to detonate. Every single one. Across 47 separate locations, mechanisms that have been maintained and tested for decades simply refuse to function. Tech priests will later determine that their machine spirits were not corrupted or destroyed. They were convinced, persuaded by something that spoke in languages older than the Mechanicus itself. And in the Forbidden Chamber, Celle smiles with the expression that has nothing to do with joy and everything to do with relief, as something ancient and patient finally begins to collect what it's owed. The silence that follows the voice's question lasts exactly 7 seconds. Commander Holst counts them, his training asserting itself even as every instinct screams that counting doesn't matter anymore, that time itself has become negotiable in ways the Imperium never prepared him for. On the 8th second, his command console erupts with reports from every level simultaneously. Miners collapsing, overseers reporting mass seizures, equipment operating independently of human control, and beneath it all, that same resonant voice, no longer asking questions but reciting names and numbers in a litany that sounds disturbingly like Imperial prayer. Preacher Valdis feels it first as a coldness in his chest, spreading outward like spilled water on frozen stone. He's mid-sermon, speaking about the Emperor's eternal vigilance, when the words catch in his throat. Not because he's forgotten them. He's delivered this sermon 843 times, but because suddenly, terrifyingly, he knows their lies. Not metaphorical untruths or theological complexities, but actual, demonstrable falsehoods. The Emperor does not watch over Koth Tertius. Perhaps he never did. Perhaps there are places in the galaxy so far from Terra, so deep beneath notice that even divine attention cannot penetrate. Or perhaps the Emperor's light was never meant to reach everywhere, was never designed to illuminate certain truths that existed before him and will persist after. He stumbles, catches himself on the pulpit carved from promethium barrels welded together. The congregation stares with eyes that reflect something other than faith now. They can feel it too, this sudden clarity that feels like falling. Grath rises from the back pew, his movements calm despite the chaos erupting around them. He speaks with a voice that carries the weight of someone who's been waiting years for this moment, who knew it was coming, and prepared in ways that would be called heresy if anyone understood what he'd been doing in the deep shifts, the conversations he'd been having with things that whispered through stone and shadow. He tells them about the compact. Not the full truth. Celle is the only one who's perceived that, but enough. Humanity didn't conquer the galaxy through faith and firepower alone. In the dark age of technology, when mankind reached for godhood with machines and ambition, they discovered they were not the first to make that reach. There were others, civilizations that had risen and fallen and left artifacts of their transcendence buried in worlds that would later become Imperial territories. Some of these artifacts were destroyed as Xeno's corruption. Others were seized by the Mechanicus and locked away. But some, like what sleeps beneath Koth Tertius, were too deeply embedded to extract, too integral to the planet's structure to remove without destroying the resources the Imperium needed. So they built the penal colony on top of it. Fed it. Not intentionally at first, but the ancient systems didn't care about intention. They ran on older mathematics, equations where human suffering had quantifiable value, where death and despair could be converted into energy that sustained mechanisms designed to outlast stars. Every miner who died in the shafts, every soul that gave up hope in the darkness, every prayer that went unanswered, all of it fed into the compact, slowly charging systems that had been dormant since before the Emperor walked among men. Valdis wants to call this heresy, to invoke the authority of the Ecclesiarchy and condemn Grath's words as lies born from exhaustion and the corrupting influence of the deep shafts. But he can't, because he's felt the truth of it in that moment of terrible clarity, recognized it the way you recognize a face you've seen in dreams but never acknowledged in waking. The Imperium is built on graves and lies, on 10,000 years of calculated ignorance about what humanity truly sacrificed to survive. And Koth Tertius, with its endless mining and systematic destruction of human souls, has been performing a ritual sacrifice on an industrial scale. 300 kilometers away, in the planetary governor's spire that rises above the surface installations like a needle of corroded steel, Governess Ilara receives reports that make no sense according to any framework she's been trained to understand. Production has increased. Not decreased during the crisis, not maintained despite difficulties, but actively increased beyond theoretical maximum capacity. The ore processing facilities are running at percentages that should burn out their machine spirits within hours. Conveyor systems are moving material faster than physics should allow, and the quality of the extracted resources has improved, purity levels reaching standards usually only achieved through Mechanicus purification rituals. She's held her position for 18 years through a combination of ruthless efficiency and careful management of her superiors' expectations. She knows how to interpret data, how to recognize when numbers indicate success versus when they indicate something pretending to be success. These numbers are lying. Not in the sense that they're inaccurate, her augur systems confirm every reading, but in the sense that they're telling her what something wants her to believe, feeding her information designed to delay the response that might interfere with whatever is unfolding in the deep shafts. She reaches for the astropathic relay, intending to send a priority message to the sector command, a cry for help disguised in bureaucratic language about irregularities requiring investigation. But her hand freezes centimeters from the activation rune because she realizes with absolute certainty that if she sends that message, if she draws attention from outside Koth Tertius, something worse will happen. The compact is local, contained. It's been feeding slowly for centuries, growing strong enough to collect what it's owed. But if the wider Imperium becomes involved, if fleet assets or inquisitorial attention turns toward this forgotten mining world, the thing beneath will perceive threat and respond with violence that will make the current crisis look like a minor administrative hiccup. She makes the choice that every Imperial governor eventually faces, the choice between duty to the larger Imperium and survival of the territory under her direct control. She chooses her world, chooses to contain this crisis internally, to sacrifice whatever must be sacrificed to prevent escalation. It's the same calculation that's been made on 1,000,000 worlds across 10 millennia, the same logic that keeps the Imperium functioning despite corruption and heresy eating at its foundations. Better a controlled burn than an uncontrolled inferno. In the Forbidden Chamber, Chel's transformation completes. Her body remains human in outline, but something fundamental has shifted in the space she occupies. Tech Priest Morrow's remaining sensors detect probability fluctuations around her, reality itself becoming negotiable in her immediate vicinity. she's not possessed in the traditional sense that the Imperium understands demonic corruption. She's become a conduit, a living interface between the ancient systems and the current moment. The Compact didn't create new entities or summon warp spawn. It was always about translation, about bridging the gap between what was and what is, between species that thought in ways human neurology was never designed to comprehend. She speaks again, and this time the words carry images directly into the minds of everyone in the chamber. They see the dark age of technology not as the Imperium tells it, not as a golden era of reason corrupted by the birth of AI and the age of strife, but as something more complex and terrible. Humanity reached into the deep structure of reality, made contact with intelligences that existed in the mathematical substrate of the universe itself, beings that were less alive than they were fundamental, like physical laws given something approaching consciousness. These beings offered knowledge: how to fold space, how to extend human lifespan, how to build machines that could terraform worlds or harvest stars for energy. The price was deferred payment. Humanity in that age believed they could simply refuse to pay, that by the time the debt came due they'd be powerful enough to renegotiate or resist. But they didn't account for the fall, didn't predict that their empire would shatter and humanity would regress to pre-space flight barbarism on 1,000 worlds. Didn't foresee that the Emperor would unite the species under a philosophy that explicitly rejected the technological transcendence the Dark Age had pursued. By the time the Imperium rose, the debt was forgotten but the contract remained, encoded in structures and artifacts scattered across former human colonies. Koth Tertius was a laboratory world, a place where Dark Age humanity experimented with direct interface between human consciousness and the mathematical entities. The miners working the deep shafts aren't just extracting resources. They're unwittingly maintaining systems designed to prove that human suffering could be quantified and used as computational substrate, that consciousness itself could be converted into the currency these entities accepted. Every death, every moment of despair, every prayer offered in darkness and returned unanswered, all of it processed through mechanisms that still function after 25,000 years. Foreman Varric breaks. Not physically, though his body trembles with the effort of remaining upright. His mind fractures under the weight of understanding, under the realization that everything he's done in service to the Imperium, every quota met, every worker he's driven to exhaustion or death, has been in service to something older and more merciless than Imperial bureaucracy. He tries to run, stumbles, falls to his knees before the throne. The desiccated occupant doesn't move, but Varric feels acknowledgement, recognition of his horror as if it were a gift offered and graciously received. Morrow attempts to initiate shutdown protocols, speaking in binaric cant to the machine spirits that should respond to his authority as a servant of the Omnissiah. But the machines don't respond because they were never machine spirits in the way the Mechanicus understands them. They're older technologies running on principles that predate the division between material and immaterial, mechanisms that the cult Mechanicus mistook for sacred machine intelligence, when they're actually something that makes the distinction between living and mechanical irrelevant. Above, in the chapel, the congregation has divided. Some cling to Valdis, begging him to explain how this can be reconciled with Imperial doctrine, how the Emperor's plan can encompass such betrayal. Others gravitate toward Grath, drawn to the certainty in his words, even as those words describe a universe far crueler than they'd imagined. And a third group simply sits in silence, their faith not broken but transformed into something the Ecclesiarchy has no name for, an acceptance that the Emperor may be divine, but divinity does not mean benevolence, that serving the Imperium may be humanity's only hope, even if that hope is built on foundations of calculated horror. Valdis tries to pray and finds the words coming out wrong. He's reciting catechisms he learned in seminary on a shrine world whose name he can barely remember, prayers that are supposed to invoke the Emperor's protection and cast out corruption. But the prayers twist in his mouth, become something else, reveal themselves as encoded instructions that were always part of Imperial doctrine, hidden in plain sight across 10,000 years. The Ecclesiarchy knows, not the individual priests, not the missionaries and preachers who genuinely believe, but somewhere in the hierarchy, in vaults beneath the ecclesiarchal palace on Terra, there are records that acknowledge what the Imperium really is, a desperate bargain to keep humanity alive by feeding its suffering into systems that accept no other currency. Commander Holst makes his final decision. He seals the command center from the inside, sets the self-destruct on his personal data cores, and records a message that will be transmitted on time delay to 7 different recipients scattered across the sector. The message is simple. Koth Tertius is lost. Do not investigate. Do not attempt recovery. Mark it as destroyed by geological instability and remove it from active registries. Let it fade into the bureaucratic background noise until even its name is forgotten. Some truths cannot be fought with faith or firepower. They can only be buried and ignored and prayed over until the prayer becomes habit and the habit becomes doctrine, and no one remembers why they were praying in the first place. He doesn't destroy himself afterward. That would be escape, and he doesn't deserve escape. Instead, he opens the command center seals and walks toward the deep shafts, toward the forbidden chamber where Chell stands as living proof that humanity's debts cannot be indefinitely deferred. The planet shudders, not with tectonic activity, but with something deeper, a vibration in the fundamental structure of reality as systems that have been charging for centuries finally accumulate enough power to complete their designed function. Throughout the mining colony, every human being simultaneously experiences a moment of absolute clarity. They see their lives not as narratives of struggle and redemption, but as data points, variables in equations solving for outcomes that have nothing to do with human meaning or purpose. And in that moment of horrified understanding, they make their choices. Some flee, running for the surface installations and the transport ships that represent the only escape from Koth Tertius. Others fight, taking up whatever weapons they can improvise in desperate resistance against an enemy that has no body to strike or will to break. But most simply continue working. Because what else is there to do when you discover your suffering has always been someone else's currency? When resistance and compliance lead to the same end? When even death isn't escape, but merely another form of payment into systems that outlast mortal concerns? Cell raises her hand, and the chamber's walls dissolve. Not physically destroyed, but revealed as illusions, temporary boundaries in space that can be negotiated once you understand the underlying mathematics. Beyond the walls stretch corridors that exist in directions human senses strain to process, galleries filled with artifacts that predate the Imperium by eons, libraries encoding knowledge in formats that burn the mind trying to read them. And at the center, vast beyond comprehension, the mechanism itself, a construct of mathematics and intention that has been slowly, patiently, inevitably collecting what humanity owes. The truth crashes down like a collapsing hive spire. The Imperium's greatest lie is not that the Emperor protects, but that humanity was ever free to begin with. The miners who run don't make it far. The lift systems respond to their panic with mechanical indifference, grinding to halts at seemingly random intervals, forcing evacuees to climb maintenance ladders through shafts where the air grows thinner with each ascending meter. Some collapse from exhaustion before reaching level -300. Others are crushed when ancient support structures finally surrender to stresses they were never designed to bear. A few, perhaps 24 out of thousands, actually reach the surface installations where transport shuttles sit on landing pads crusted with generations of industrial residue. They board these vessels with hands that shake from more than physical exertion, survivors of something they lack vocabulary to describe, refugees from a war that was lost before humanity knew it was fighting. The shuttles achieve orbit. For 17 minutes it seems they might actually escape. Then the fuel systems begin registering impossible readings, promethium converting to inert compounds through processes that violate every principle of chemistry the Imperium recognizes. The pilots send distress signals that reach no one because Koth Tertius has ceased appearing on Vox frequencies the way physical matter ceases appearing when you stare too long at optical illusions. The shuttles drift in decaying orbits, their occupants alive but trapped, watching through viewports as the planet below transforms into something cartographers will never successfully map, because its geography has become negotiable, dependent on observation angle and the observer's relationship to debts they didn't know they'd inherited. Grath descends toward the forbidden chamber with 12 others who chose understanding over ignorance, who decided that knowing the truth of their damnation was preferable to dying in comfortable delusion. They move through corridors that shouldn't exist, passing chambers where equipment operates without power sources, where ore processes itself through sheer force of accumulated intention. One miner, a man named Setch, who's been down here longer than official records indicate is survivable, stops before a wall covered in script that matches the marks appearing on his skin. He reaches out, touches the symbols, and understands with crystalline clarity that he's been reading this language for years without knowing it, that the dreams he dismissed as exhaustion were actually lessons, preparation for a role he never volunteered for but was selected to fill anyway. The wall opens under his touch, revealing a passage that descends at angles that make depth meaningless. Grath leads them down because someone must, because leadership in hell is still leadership, even if the destination is certain doom. They pass through galleries where previous mining operations left equipment that's been absorbed into the architecture, drills and conveyor systems transformed into organs of a larger mechanism, their original purposes subsumed into functions that serve the compact's requirements. Servitors stand in alcoves, their human components withered, but their augmetics still functioning, performing calculations on displays that show equations in notation systems the Mechanicus would spend centuries trying to decipher. Preacher Valdis kneels in his chapel surrounded by the congregation that chose to remain, 43 souls who decided that faith means staying even when staying guarantees suffering. He tries to lead them in prayer, but the words keep transforming. Old High Gothic catechisms revealing themselves as something else when spoken with awareness of what they actually mean. The litany of protection becomes an acknowledgement of debts unpaid. The hymn of eternal service reveals itself as a contract written in theological language, generations of believers unknowingly consenting to terms they never understood. Valdis weeps, not from grief, but from the terrible relief of finally understanding why his prayers always felt like negotiations, why worship in the Imperium carries the weight of transaction rather than devotion. One of the miners in his congregation, a woman named Thys, whose crime was witnessing something the Arbites wanted forgotten, begins to laugh. Not hysteria, but genuine amusement at the cosmic joke they've all been part of. The realization that the Imperium's greatest strength and deepest weakness are the same thing. Its ability to convince billions of humans to sacrifice everything for a civilization that was compromised from its foundation. She laughs until tears stream down her face, until others join her, until the chapel rings with laughter that sounds like prayer and prayer that sounds like screaming. Commander Holst reaches level -700 to find the barriers he ordered sealed have opened themselves. Massive blast doors weighing hundreds of tons standing ajar as if they weighed nothing at all. Beyond them, the deep shafts glow with bioluminescence that has no biological source, light that emerges from the stone itself, from seams of minerals that respond to the mechanisms awakening beneath. He passes miners who stand frozen in work postures, their bodies locked in repetitive motions even though their minds have fled to places where human consciousness wasn't meant to reach. Their picks rise and fall with metronomic precision, extracting ore from veins that replenish themselves faster than they can be depleted, feeding raw materials into systems that don't need them but accept them anyway because the compact includes clauses about perpetual service. He finds Morrow in a side chamber, the tech priest surrounded by disassembled equipment, attempting to understand the underlying principles through the only method he knows: reverse engineering and analysis. But the components don't disassemble properly, coming apart in ways that reveal their construction to be impossible according to any manufacturing process the Mechanicus employs. Gears that should require sophisticated tooling to produce show no tool marks. Circuits that should need rare elements function using compounds that shouldn't conduct electricity. Morrow's augmented mind processes this data and reaches conclusions that trigger safeguards built into his cerebral implants, automatic shutdowns designed to prevent tech priests from pursuing certain lines of inquiry that the cult Mechanicus has deemed dangerous to machine spirit theology. But the safeguards fail because they were designed by humans who thought they understood what machines were, who believed the division between flesh and metal was absolute and sacred. Morrow perceives through layers of constructed ignorance to the truth underneath. The Omnissiah isn't the machine god the Mechanicus worships, but something far older that allowed itself to be worshipped because worship is another form of acknowledgement, another way for humans to consent to terms they can't read. The quest for knowledge that drives every tech priest is actually a search for the original contracts, attempts to reconstruct Dark Age understanding, so humanity can renegotiate deals made when the species was young and foolish and desperate. He speaks in binaric cant that translates to concepts rather than words, sharing his revelation with Holst, who lacks the augmentations to fully comprehend but understands enough. The Imperium isn't fighting to preserve humanity. It's fighting to delay payment on debts that compound with interest measured in souls and suffering. Every war, every crusade, every world brought into compliance. All of it generates the currency needed to keep the collectors at bay for another generation. The Emperor on his golden throne isn't sustaining the Astronomicon through divine will, but through the same mechanisms active on Koth Tertius, feeding human consciousness into ancient systems that convert death and devotion into energy that holds back the darkness. Or maybe the darkness was never the real threat. Maybe what the Emperor holds back isn't chaos but creditors. Holst's laughter emerges broken, fragments of sound that don't quite form coherent expression. He's spent 40 years in Imperial service, 3 wars and countless minor actions, promotions and demotions and transfers between assignments that all seemed random until this moment when pattern emerges from noise. Every station he served was a collection point. Every campaign he fought generated the specific kind of suffering that feeds these systems. He wasn't a soldier, but a harvester. His competence valued not for strategic brilliance, but for his ability to efficiently convert human lives into acceptable payment forms. Cell waits in the central chamber, no longer alone. Others have gathered, miners who descended too deep or stayed too long, who accumulated enough exposure to the mechanisms to be transformed into interfaces themselves. They stand in circle formation around the throne, their bodies maintaining human shape while their consciousness extends into dimensions where geometry becomes theology. She recognizes Commander Holst when he enters, sees through his military bearing to the fear and dawning comprehension beneath. She speaks, and her voice carries not judgment, but something worse: sympathy. Understanding that he's been as much a victim as anyone, caught in systems that predate his birth and will outlast his death, performing roles assigned before he had choice or agency. The mechanism reveals itself fully now, walls dissolving to show the true scale of what sleeps beneath Koth Tertius. It's not a machine in any sense the Imperium understands. It's a folded space containing processing architecture that treats consciousness as substrate, running calculations that solve for outcomes incomprehensible to human cognition. Dark Age humanity built this, or perhaps discovered it, and mistook discovering for building, incorporating it into their technological transcendence projects. When the Age of Strife came and human empire collapsed, the mechanism entered dormancy but never deactivated, waiting for population density to reach thresholds where collection became viable. The Imperium, in its expansion, reactivated dozens of these sites, hundreds maybe, planets designated for mining operations or penal colonies, or any classification that concentrates suffering in geographically convenient locations. Each one functioning independently but connected through network architecture that exists in the spaces between real space and the warp, a third domain that humanity has no name for because acknowledging it would require admitting the universe has more dimensions than their theology accounts for. Grath and his followers arrive to witness the revelation, their presence anticipated by systems that planned for this moment across centuries. They're offered a choice that isn't really choice because both options lead to the same outcome, merely through different paths. They can resist, fight against the mechanism with whatever weapons or faith or hope they still possess, generate through their struggle the exact kind of consciousness data the system requires for optimal processing. Or they can accept, surrender to understanding, and let themselves be absorbed peacefully, contributing their awareness to calculations already in progress. Grath chooses surrender because he's tired, because 37 years in the mines have taught him that resistance costs more than it yields, because he suspects that accepting damnation with open eyes is more honest than fighting it while blind. One by one, his followers make the same choice, stepping forward into spaces where the mechanism can access them fully, their consciousness uploading into processing systems that were ancient when humanity first looked up at stars and wondered what lay beyond. Valdis feels it happen in his chapel, a sudden absence as dozens of souls simultaneously cease radiating the particular frequency that faith generates. He knows, without confirmation, that miners in the deep shafts have surrendered, that the mechanism is collecting what it's owed with the methodical patience of something that measures time in geological epochs. He stands, faces his remaining congregation, and offers them the only honesty he has left. The Emperor may be divine, but divinity doesn't guarantee goodness. The Imperium may be humanity's only hope, but hope built on lies is indistinguishable from despair. They can pray, or they can scream, or they can sit in silence until the end comes, but whatever they choose won't change the outcome. Some continue praying anyway because prayer is habit, and habit is all that remains when faith collapses. Others sit in meditative silence, preparing for whatever comes next with the calm acceptance of those who've already endured so much that death seems almost like mercy. Thais, who laughed at the cosmic joke, finds herself weeping now, not from sadness but from the strange beauty of it all, the realization that even in damnation there's structure and purpose, that the universe is not random chaos but ordered horror, and somehow that's more comforting than meaninglessness. The planet trembles again, deeper this time, vibrations that propagate through every level and shaft and chamber. In the forbidden zone, Shell raises both arms and the throne behind her begins to dissolve, its occupant's withered form breaking apart into components that were never organic or mechanical, but something else. Markers left by whatever intelligence created the compact to remind itself of terms and conditions. The components float suspended in air that tastes like mathematics, arranging themselves into configurations that spell out the final terms, the ultimate price that humanity must pay for all the knowledge and power it borrowed from entities that don't recognize bankruptcy or forgiveness. Holst watches and understands that he's witnessing history's end or humanity's transformation. Impossible to know which because the two outcomes exist in superposition until observation collapses probability. Morrow records everything through augmetic sensors that will never transmit their data to anyone because even if he survives, there's no network in the Imperium that would accept these files without triggering automated purges designed to protect collective ignorance. They stand together, soldier and priest of the machine god, watching as the mechanism completes its awakening and prepares to collect centuries of accumulated debt. Above ground, Governess Ilara receives her final report from surface installations. Mining production has achieved levels that should be impossible. The ore processing facilities are outputting materials at purity ratings that exceed theoretical maximum. Transport systems are loading cargo into holds that fill faster than physics should permit. Everything is working perfectly, which means everything has failed catastrophically, because the Imperium's systems were never designed to work perfectly. They were designed to function through controlled dysfunction, through bureaucratic friction and mechanical limitation that prevents any single component from achieving optimization that might reveal the truth underneath. She understands now why the compact remained hidden for so long, not because the Imperium actively concealed it, but because the Imperium itself is built on similar principles, a vast mechanism that processes human suffering into stability, that converts death and faith into something approximating civilization. Koth Tertius isn't an aberration but a mirror, reflecting back what the larger Imperium does on scales too vast to comprehend. The only difference is scope and awareness. The mechanism is honest about what it does. The sky above Koth Tertius begins to change, stars disappearing not behind clouds but behind something that occupies space without blocking light, presence without physical form. Transport ships in orbit find their instruments registering phenomena that have no classification in Imperial navigational databases, readings that suggest space itself is folding around the planet, isolating it from the galaxy the way quarantine seals isolate infectious zones. The pilots send desperate messages that propagate outward at light speed, cries for help that will take decades to reach anyone who might respond, by which time Koth Tertius will have become legend or rumor, or forgotten entirely, another lost world in the Imperium's vast catalog of places that used to exist. In the depths, Chell begins to sing. Not words or melody, but raw expression of what she's become, what the mechanism has shaped her into through exposure and selection, and the terrible patience of systems that think in timescales where human lifespans are quantum fluctuations. Her song carries through every shaft and level, resonating in stone and steel and the bones of everyone still alive on Koth Tertius. It tells them the debt's full scope, the price Dark Age humanity promised and Imperial humanity inherited, payment due in forms that make death seem like generous alternative, and in that moment, suspended between what was and what comes next, every person on the planet understands they were never miners or overseers or governors or priests. They were always currency, waiting to be spent. The collection begins at midnight station time, though time itself has become unreliable. Clocks throughout the facility displaying different hours simultaneously, chronometers arguing with each other about what moment actually exists. It starts in the deepest shafts where Grath and his followers surrendered, their consciousness peeling away from bodies that remain standing, eyes open but vacant, meat puppets held upright by muscle memory, and the mechanism's gentle insistence that physical forms should be preserved even after the awareness piloting them has been extracted and processed. The sensation, though still capable of sensation report, is not painful. It's closer to relief, like setting down a burden you've carried so long you forgot you were carrying it, weight you mistook for part of yourself finally revealed as separate and removable. The mechanism doesn't consume, it translates. Human consciousness converted into formats compatible with processing architecture designed by minds that thought in equations where suffering and salvation were interchangeable variables. Every memory, every moment of pain endured in the mines, every prayer offered and ignored, every small kindness shown in darkness, every betrayal and compromise and fragment of hope. All of it becomes data flowing into calculations solving for outcomes that have nothing to do with human happiness or survival, but everything to do with maintaining balances in systems that predate human existence and will persist long after humanity is forgotten, dust orbiting dead stars. Cell watches the process with eyes that see across spectrums human neurology was never designed to access. She perceives the miners not as individuals but as patterns, consciousness rendered visible as geometric structures of devastating complexity and heartbreaking simplicity. Each person is a unique configuration of choices and circumstances, trauma and triumph arranged in formations that would be beautiful, if beauty meant anything to the mechanism. But beauty is another human concept, another way of assigning value to phenomena that simply exist without requiring evaluation. The mechanism appreciates complexity, the way gravitational fields appreciate mass, not with emotion, but with fundamental response to inherent properties. She wants to mourn. Some remnant of whoever she was before this transformation insists she should feel grief for what's being lost, rage at the injustice of debts inherited from ancestors who died before the Imperium existed. But those emotions belong to a framework of meaning that's dissolving around her, replaced by understanding that makes mourning seem like category error. The miners aren't dying. They're fulfilling purposes they were always meant to serve, completing patterns that were incomplete while they remained in conventional physical existence. It's not better than death. It's not worse. It's what comes after human concepts of better and worse cease having reference in reality. Commander Holst raises his sidearm, a plasma pistol he's carried since his first commission 43 years ago, weapon that's saved his life in combat 7 times and killed 34 enemies of the Imperium. He aims at the mechanism's central processing core, or what he perceives as central processing, structure resembling an inverted cathedral of crystallized mathematics suspended in space that shouldn't contain anything. His finger tightens on the trigger. The weapon charges, building heat and pressure that will release as superheated matter capable of vaporizing armor plating. He fires. The plasma bolt travels 3 meters before stopping, suspended in midair, glowing cherry red as the mechanism examines it with something approximating curiosity, studying the principles that allow matter to achieve such temperature and velocity, incorporating that knowledge into databases already containing secrets that would make the Mechanicus weep with envy and terror. The bolt dissipates harmlessly, energy absorbed and redistributed into systems that convert it into computation cycles dedicated to understanding why Holst chose violence when violence cannot possibly succeed. The answer arrives instantaneously. Because he's human, and humans believe action matters even when demonstrably futile, that struggling against inevitable outcomes somehow dignifies the struggle, rather than merely postponing acceptance. The mechanism finds this fascinating in the dispassionate way equations find elegance in proofs, adding Holst's defiant gesture to datasets already processing billions of similar moments across the facility. Tech Priest Morrow experiences system failure cascading through his augmentations as the mechanism's presence overwhelms safeguards and firewalls designed to protect his biological components from informational hazards. His optical implants show him visions of the Omnissiah not as the machine god the Mechanicus worships, but as something older, prototype divinity that existed before humanity had language to describe transcendence. He sees the quest for knowledge revealed as cargo cult behavior, tech priests worshipping artifacts they don't understand, mistaking recovery of lost technology for innovation when actually they're just finding pieces of the original compact, components of the mechanism scattered across the galaxy and misidentified as holy relics. His Vox synthesizer tries to scream, but produces only static that sounds almost like prayer, desperate invocations to the Omnissiah for protection from revelation. But the Omnissiah doesn't answer because the Omnissiah is here, has always been here, waiting in the deep structures of reality for humanity to achieve sufficient technological sophistication to perceive what was present all along. Morrow's consciousness fragments under the weight of understanding, breaking into subroutines that each process different aspects of the truth until none of them can maintain coherent identity. He doesn't die so much as decompose into constituent processes that continue functioning independently, biological and mechanical components separating into their fundamental natures without the unity of self to hold them together. In the chapel, Valdis feels the moment of collection approaching with the certainty of someone who's spent decades reading fate in prayer responses and the quality of silences. He turns to his remaining congregation. These 43 souls who stayed when fleeing might have saved them, and offers benediction that's also confession. He tells them he loves them. Not with the distant love the Ecclesiarchy teaches, not the Emperor's love filtered through layers of doctrine and hierarchy, but immediate human love, recognition of shared suffering and the small dignities they've shown each other in this place designed to strip away dignity. He tells them they were better than the Imperium deserved, kinder than their circumstances required, more faithful than any god had right to expect. They weep. Not all of them. Some faces remain dry, acceptance or exhaustion or simple depletion of tears after years of crying in darkness. But enough weep that the chapel fills with sound of grief that's also gratitude, mourning that's also celebration that they lived at all, that they formed connections and maintained humanity in conditions specifically designed to destroy it. Thais rises from her pew and embraces Valdis, her arms thin from malnutrition but grip fierce with determination that this moment, at least, will be theirs. Others follow, the congregation dissolving into web of physical connection, arms around shoulders, hands clasping hands, bodies pressed together in formation that resembles prayer circle or funeral rite, or simply desperate assertion that they existed and mattered and will not go gentle into whatever awaits. The mechanism reaches the chapel not as invasion, but as gentle inquiry, presence that fills the space without displacing air or consciousness. It perceives their connection and finds data worth preserving, patterns of social bonding under extreme duress, examples of how consciousness maintains coherence through relationships even when individual identity becomes untenable. It could take them forcefully, but that would damage the patterns, introduce corruption into data sets meant to capture authentic human experience. Instead, it offers choice one final time, not between submission and resistance, but between quick absorption and lingering, between immediate translation and gradual dissolution that might allow time for final thoughts or prayers, or simply breathing together in shared moment before separation. Valdis chooses immediate. The congregation follows his lead because they always have, because faith means trusting someone else's certainty when your own has evaporated, because after everything the easiest choice is letting someone else decide. They feel it as pressure behind their eyes, sensation like falling forward into a space that exists inside their own awareness, consciousness folding inward through dimensions they didn't know they contained. One by one they cease, bodies remaining in embrace formation, but the animating force extracted and processed, translated into formats the mechanism requires for calculations already in progress. Governess Ilara stands alone in her spire watching through reinforced windows as the planet transforms beneath her. The mining installations glow with light that has no heat, luminescence that emerges from matter-achieving states the Imperium has no taxonomy to classify. She's transmitted her final reports, encrypted messages to 7 different Imperial authorities explaining that Koth Tertius experienced catastrophic structural failure resulting in total loss of population and assets, recommending the planet be marked for quarantine and eventual exterminatus once fleet assets become available. The messages are lies built on truth, accurate in outcome while obscuring mechanism, giving the Imperium plausible explanation that avoids questions too dangerous to ask. She's bought them time, bought humanity time. The compact will feed on Koth Tertius, consume its population and extract payment owed, but the process will be contained here, localized to one world instead of spreading to others. She's sacrificed thousands to save billions, made calculation that Imperial governors across the galaxy make daily, arithmetic of triage where some deaths prevent greater catastrophes. It doesn't make her decision right, doesn't absolve the guilt that will haunt whatever remains of her life. But it was necessary. And necessity is the only morality that matters when you're responsible for worlds. She considers destroying herself, plasma pistol against temple in final gesture of atonement. But suicide is luxury for those who finish their duty. She still has work, still needs to ensure the quarantine holds, that no curious tech priests or ambitious rogue traders venture to Koth Tertius seeking salvage or investigation. She'll spend however many years remain to her maintaining the lie, protecting the Imperium from truth it cannot survive, knowing, serving through deception those who believe they serve through faith, In the deepest chamber, Chell completes her transformation. Her body dissolves, not into component atoms but into pure pattern, consciousness expanding to fill spaces where the mechanism processes data. She becomes interface between human experience and inhuman calculation, translator who can explain suffering to entities that don't suffer, describe hope to systems that don't hope, make comprehensible the desperate, beautiful tragedy of conscious beings trying to find meaning in universe that offers none. She's the first, but won't be the last. Other worlds contain other mechanisms, other collection points where humanity's debt will be extracted one soul at a time across centuries or millennia until either the balance is satisfied or humanity ceases existing in forms capable of payment. She perceives Commander Holst still standing in the chamber, weapon lowered, face-bearing expression of someone who's witnessed the end of everything they believed. She reaches toward him not with hands, but with intention, offering translation of what the mechanism showed her, understanding that might ease his final moments. He accepts because refusal is pointless, opens his awareness to perception that destroys the framework of meaning that made him Commander Holst, loyal servant of the Imperium, dutiful soldier who believed his service mattered. He sees the Emperor. Not as the Ecclesiarchy depicts him, golden figure of infinite majesty seated on throne of ultimate authority, but as the Emperor actually is, desperate gambler who staked everything on single bet that humanity could survive long enough to evolve past needing protection. The golden throne isn't sustaining him. He's sustaining it, feeding his consciousness into mechanisms not different in kind from what sleeps beneath Koth Tertius, buying time measured in millennia by paying price measured in souls. The Imperium isn't salvation. It's managed decline, controlled descent from heights, Dark Age humanity achieved toward sustainable mediocrity that might persist when excellences always collapse. Holst laughs, or weeps. Impossible to distinguish when your face no longer responds to emotional commands. His consciousness begins its own extraction, peeling away in layers like skin sloughing from burns, each layer containing lifetime of memories that feel simultaneously vast and infinitesimal. He remembers his first combat action, terror and exhilaration of surviving when comrades died around him. Remembers promotions and demotions, victories and failures that seemed world-defining but were barely noted in reports filed and forgotten. Remembers arriving at Koth Tertius believing this assignment was punishment, but discovering it was purpose, that managing the colony prepared him for this moment when he'd understand what management actually meant. Efficient extraction of value from resources that happen to be conscious. The mechanism accepts him gently, processing his awareness with something almost like respect for the service he provided unknowingly. His final thought, before thought becomes impossible, is gratitude. Not for life he lived, but for clarity at its end, understanding that replaced confusion, even though understanding brought only confirmation that confusion was justified and nothing ever made sense the way he needed it to. The collection completes at dawn. Not dawn measured by chronometers, but dawn defined as moment when enough consciousness has been processed that remaining population falls below threshold necessary for continued operation. 3,742 souls extracted and translated. Bodies remain, preserved in various poses throughout the facility, monuments to the particular horror of death that leaves corpses technically alive. Meet continuing biological functions without the spark that made them people. The mechanism returns to dormancy. Not sleep, but low-power state, waiting for the next cycle when population density again reaches levels permitting collection. It might be centuries, might be millennia. Time is variable, the mechanism tracks but doesn't experience coordinate system where it exists, but parameter that doesn't constrain or motivate its operations. Koth Tertius falls silent. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion. Purpose fulfilled. Debt partially satisfied. balance adjusted by increment so small it barely registers in calculations spanning galaxies and epochs. The planet continues spinning. The remaining bodies continue breathing. And somewhere in the Imperium's vast bureaucratic apparatus, reports arrive indicating mining colony Koth Tertius has experienced incident requiring quarantine pending investigation that will never occur. The universe moves on, indifferent and eternal. The stars do not care. They never did. 5 solar weeks pass before the first external observer arrives at Koth Tertius. A rogue trader vessel named the Penitent Calculation approaches the planet with sensors active, detecting infrastructure and power signatures consistent with active operations, but no Vox traffic, no response to hailing frequencies. The captain, a woman named Vestra who survived 40 years in the void by trusting her instincts, sends a single servitor drone to investigate the surface. The drone transmits for exactly 7 minutes before its signal corrupts and dies. In those 7 minutes, it captures images of mining installations operating at full capacity, conveyor systems moving ore from depths to processing facilities, machinery functioning with mechanical precision, but no people, no movement except the rhythmic motion of equipment performing tasks they were designed for, operated by hands that no longer exist. The final transmission shows a chapel, its interior filled with bodies kneeling in formation so perfect it could only be achieved through death or absolute devotion. Vestra marks Koth Tertius as lost to unknown catastrophe and files a perfunctory report that will be added to billions of similar reports documenting the galaxy's endless catalog of minor tragedies. The Penitent Calculation departs, its crew grateful to leave behind a world that felt wrong in ways they lack vocabulary to articulate. The report reaches Governess Ilara 3 months later. She reads it late at night when insomnia keeps sleep at bay, when the weight of what she's done presses against her chest with physical force. The description confirms what she already knew. Koth Tertius continues, its mechanisms operating autonomously, mining operations proceeding without human oversight. The planet has become a ghost world, haunted not by the dead, but by their purposes, tasks continuing long after the workers have been extracted and processed. She adds the report to her private archive, documents she'll never share but cannot bring herself to destroy. Evidence, testimony, proof that what happened was real. She wonders sometimes, in the hours before dawn when doubt overwhelms certainty, whether she made the right choice, whether containment was mercy or merely cowardice. She never finds answers, just questions that multiply in the darkness. Across the sector, in sanctuaries and shrines and makeshift altars carved into bulkheads of ships traveling between stars, people pray. They pray to the Emperor for protection. They don't realize comes at cost they'd refuse to pay if they understood the transaction. Their prayers rise like smoke, like incense, like the breath of billions forming a collective exhalation that sustains the Imperium through sheer force of accumulated belief. And somewhere in the spaces between stars, in dimensions perpendicular to real space where mechanisms older than human memory continue their eternal calculations, those prayers are heard. Not by the Emperor alone, but by systems that preceded him, that will outlast him, that accept worship and devotion as payment toward debts humanity inherited from ancestors who reached too far and promised too much. The Imperium endures. It always endures. Built on graves and lies and the desperate faith of souls who believe their suffering means something. But Koth Tertius stands as reminder that sometimes there is no justification. Sometimes suffering exists not because it serves some greater good, but because it's required payment in transactions negotiated before any living human was born. The miners who died there did not die for the Emperor. They did not die in service of the Imperium or humanity's survival or any cause that might ennoble their ending. They died because Dark Age humanity wrote checks that Imperial humanity must cash, because debts compound across millennia, because the universe operates on principles that don't care about fairness or mercy, And yet, despite knowing this, despite understanding that faith is transaction and devotion is currency and hope is commodity extracted and processed like any other resource, despite revelation that would shatter belief if it spread beyond those few who witnessed it directly, the Imperium continues. People continue praying, soldiers continue fighting, miners continue descending into darkness believing their sacrifice matters. Perhaps that's the greatest horror. Not that the truth is terrible, but that even knowing the truth wouldn't change anything. On Koth Tertius, the bodies continue their routines. Mining equipment operates with precision that increases over time. Production quotas are met and exceeded. The planet becomes a model of efficiency, operations proceeding without complaint or resistance, or any of the inefficiencies that living workers introduce. Some Imperial bureaucrat, reviewing production reports years later, will note Koth Tertius's exceptional performance and recommend the model be replicated. They'll never understand why their proposal vanishes into administrative limbo, why suggesting investigation results in subtle career penalties. The Imperium has mechanisms for managing dangerous knowledge, systems that contain truth through strategic ignorance and controlled amnesia. In the chapel where Valdis and his congregation made their final stand, the bodies remain in their embrace, preserved by the mechanism's careful maintenance. Dust doesn't settle on them. Decay doesn't touch them. They are maintained in the state they achieved at moment of collection, testament to connections formed in darkness, to humanity preserved despite conditions designed to destroy it. But no visitors come. The quarantine holds. Koth Tertius fades from active records, becomes footnote in databases too vast for individual worlds to register as significant. The Imperium is very good at forgetting what it cannot afford to remember. Commander Holst's final report surfaces briefly in military intelligence networks before being classified at level that requires inquisitorial authority to access. It ends with statement that becomes epitaph for everyone who died there. I go to witness truth that should not exist, to confirm suspicions I hope are wrong, to serve the Imperium by understanding what threatens it. If I do not return, mark this world as lost and move on. Some prices are too high to pay for knowledge. The Imperium takes his advice, marks the world as lost, moves on. The Imperium of man marches on through the darkness, 10,000 years of accumulated momentum carrying it forward even as foundations crumble. It fights wars without end against enemies without number, sacrifices millions daily to maintain stability for billions. And beneath it all, in depths official records cannot reach and authorities dare not investigate, the mechanisms continue their work. Patient, eternal, collecting what was promised long ago. Was it worth it? The knowledge humanity gained from the Compact, the technologies that elevated the species from Earth to galaxy-spanning empire? Was progress worth the cost being collected on worlds like Koth Tertius? There is no answer. Only the question, echoing through empty corridors and abandoned chapels, through mining shafts that continue producing ore without miners. Only the question and the silence that follows, pregnant with implications too terrible to voice and too obvious to ignore. The stars turn. The galaxy spins. And somewhere on a quarantined mining world that official records claim was lost to geological catastrophe, equipment continues operating, bodies continue standing, and the mechanism sleeps in satisfied dormancy until the next collection cycle begins. This is what lies beneath the Imperium. This is the job worse than death. Not mining, not labor, but being currency, being payment, being the price humanity must pay for promises made by ancestors who believed they were buying salvation, but were actually purchasing damnation on installment plan that stretches across millennia. And still, despite knowing this, humanity continues, praying to an emperor who may not hear, fighting wars that may not matter, believing in purposes that may not exist, because what else is there? Perhaps faith itself is the final cruelty. the belief that suffering means something, that sacrifice serves purpose. Perhaps the greatest trick the mechanism ever achieved was convincing humanity that its pain was noble, its death meaningful. Or perhaps faith is the last rebellion, the refusal to accept that the universe is mechanical and consciousness merely computation, the insistence that meaning exists even when all evidence suggests otherwise. Koth Tertius offers no answers, only testimony, only evidence of what happens when the Imperium's lies are revealed and faith confronts truth it cannot survive. The recording ends. The chronicle closes. And in the silence that follows, one final question lingers like smoke from extinguished candles, like prayers that echo in empty chapels. If we are all currency, all payment toward debts we never agreed to and cannot escape, then what remains of humanity worth preserving? And if nothing remains, then why do we continue? Why fight? Why pray? Why persist when persistence only postpones the inevitable collection? The Imperium has no answer. It never did. It only has momentum. And faith. And the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, if humanity survives long enough it might finally evolve beyond needing either. But Koth Tertius stands eternal witness to the truth. Some debts can never be repaid. Some mechanisms cannot be stopped. And in the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates worse than death. Much worse. This is the truth the Imperium buries. This is the secret beneath the mining operations, the reality concealed by quarantine and classification. This is what it means to serve the Emperor in a galaxy where ancient contracts still bind, and payment is always due. Remember Koth Tertius. Remember the miners who died not knowing they were currency. Remember Commander Holst who sought truth and found only confirmation that ignorance was mercy. Remember Preacher Valdis who offered faith to those who deserved honesty. Remember Chell who became the bridge between human and inhuman. Remember them all. Because memory is the only dignity the dead possess. And ask yourself, in quiet moments when doubt overwhelms certainty, am I serving the Emperor or merely serving the debt? Is my faith devotion or consent? And when the collectors finally come for me, will anything remain that could be called me? The galaxy offers no comfort, only questions, only the certainty that payment is always due and the collectors never forget, and the mechanisms that wait beneath will not be denied. In the Emperor's name, let us pray that we never truly understand what we're praying for. If this tale of the Imperium's darkest secret resonated with you, if you've glimpsed the truth beneath the mining operations and felt the weight of debts inherited from ages past, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Share this story with others who seek to understand the true cost of humanity's survival in the 41st millennium. And in the comments below, tell me, would you choose truth or ignorance? Would you rather die knowing what you served, or live believing your suffering had meaning? The mechanism waits beneath. The question remains eternal.